honored to be asked to do this. I've been in the workplace for over 35 years, and I have been using what I learned in Mussar for at least 15 of those years. I want to share with you some of my thoughts and experiences and perhaps suggest to you some ways Mussar could be useful to you in the workplace. First, a little bit about me. My name is Robert Mass. I'm a lawyer by background. I had a brief stint in litigation at a corporate firm in New York, and then worked at the ACLU. Spent 10 years in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office where I was a prosecutor, and I've been at Goldman Sachs for 22 years. The entire time I've been at Goldman, I've been in what is called compliance, where my job is to basically get people to do the right thing. My job is to craft standards of behavior for them, train them, help advise them, monitor their behavior, and take actions if I think that I see a problem. So my whole career has been focused on people and what makes them tick, and why they act the way they do. I began studying Mussar with Alan and practicing over 15 years ago now. And my practice involves the full range of Mussar practices, from reading text, solo and sabruta, journaling, daily affirmations, visualization, kabbalot. Some years ago, I started facilitating VODs, and I found that was very helpful for me. And basically, the reason I thought it would be useful to do this when I was asked was that I found that Mussar was really transformative for both my personal life and my work life. I'm going to discuss with you 3 ways in which Mussar can enter the workplace. I'll illustrate them with stories from my own experience. First, let me discuss how the workplace can be an ideal place for you to practice Mussar. I call it your Mussar gymnasium. Second, how Mussar can lead you to cope with the kinds of crises that occur often in work environments. And third, how Mussar can actually be a tool for your success at work. It can help you as a business person or as a worker. So let me start with work as a Mussar gymnasium. So Hashem throws challenges at us every day. Each one of those challenges, as you know, is a test. And in your job, you get tested a lot. So the workplace is a particularly good setting for you to practice responding to those tests. Let me just give you a couple, set the stage a little bit. At work, you need to regularly present yourself to others. So that will tend to trigger your middot of humility. It's a place where you make your living, and so the fear of being fired or not making enough money can implicate your middot of equanimity and perhaps of trust. At work, we're often asked to evaluate other people, either formally as part of a review system if you're evaluating your colleagues, or in evaluating potential partners for your firm or customers. And that also tests your ability to judge other people with tzedek, and perhaps your truth-telling, the middot of truth. And of course, at work, it tends to be project-oriented, so that tests your sense of order, of seder. I can multiply examples, but the basic point is clear. A workplace is a well-equipped Mussar gymnasium. If you recognize it as such and recognize the equipment and use it all, you'll grow. So the first lesson to recognize is that when you step in the door of your workplace, you need to remember that you are a soul, that you're surrounded by other souls, and that your spiritual work should go along with your daily workplace environment. I'm not suggesting you take half a day to meditate, but rather keep the awareness alive while you're at work to what's going on internally with you. I know I find all too often that I'm in a good mood, and as soon as I step through the door of the office, my spiritual awareness disappears. And it only reemerges when I leave the office at the end of the day and get on the train. And then I sit down, relax, and start to reflect on the day. You might want to, however, do something that I've done from time to time, which is take my journal into work with me. or take the card on which I put my daily affirmation, or the Mussar test, a test I'm reading, and sort of put it on my desk or in a place where I can see it as a reminder. Or I can set aside a few minutes, or in addition to that, set aside a few minutes at work to journal, to repeat the affirmation or read the text. One technique I've used is when I go to a meeting. Oftentimes, when I return to my office after the meeting, and the emotions are still raw, that's when I'll pull out my journal and just jot down a few notes so that I don't lose it before the end of the day. So a couple of lessons that I learned by doing this sort of practice in the workplace. I'm constantly in meetings at which there are many people around the table trying to decide on a course of action. And I discovered through monitoring my mental traffic during those meetings that a significant part of my attention was diverted in those meetings to thinking about how are people reacting to my comments and to the other people's comments. Who was making the best comments? Who was sounding the smartest? Did I sound smart? I even found on occasion that I was upset when somebody else had made a comment that I didn't make. Since I didn't make it, I felt like I had questions why I was even in that meeting. Was I going to get promoted? Maybe that person was going to be promoted ahead of me. Once I became aware of that, I was able to sort of do a lot of journaling about how those meetings frequently combined me built my sense of pride, humility, and it was transformative. I became a much better colleague, a better contributor, and I could devote my energy to the task at hand. But even more exciting to me is that when you're at the workplace, you can go over to the gym machine that I'm going to call the Kabbalah, taking practice upon yourself to work into your workday. Now, the workplace is an ideal place to exercise a Kabbalah. You have a captive group of colleagues. You know where you'll be at any time, where they are. You can plan easily. It's not like, you decide you want to give money to people, to give money to somebody as part of a practice, say, of generosity, and you have to look for them because they're not there. No, at work, you're going to see the people. If you know they're there, you can do it every day. And if you accept yourself, let's say you accept yourself the practice of judging everyone positively, you'll have ample opportunity to apply that every single day because you're always going to be asked, what do you think of that guy's work? For me, the single most transformative thing that I ever did at the workplace in connection with Mussar was after I read Rabbi Dessler's wonderful essay, A Discourse on Loving Kindness. The teaching in it moved me tremendously. I'm going to read to you from what Rabbi Dessler teaches because I think it is really helpful and will be helpful to some of you in the workplace as well. This is from Dessler. We usually think it is love which causes giving because we observe that a person showers gifts and favors on the one he loves. But there's another side to the argument. Giving may bring about love for the same reason that a person loves. Giving may bring about love for the same reason that a person loves what he himself has crafted or nurtured. He recognizes in it part of himself. I have been shown a source in the sayings of our rabbis, which may indicate that they held the opinion that we just put forward, that love flows in the direction of the giving. They say in the tractate Derech Eretz Zuta, if you want to keep close to the love of your friend, make it your concern to seek his welfare. Since most people's, this is again Rabbi Dessler, since most people's power of giving remains at this vestigial level, they tend to restrict their giving and their love to a narrow circle of relatives and friends. They look on everyone else as strangers and deal with them in ways dominated by the power of taking. Envy, exploitation, grasping, and greed rule the day. If one were only to reflect that a person comes to love the one to whom he gives, he would realize that the only reason the other person seems a stranger to him is because he has not yet given to him. He has not taken the trouble to show him friendly concern. If I give to somebody, I feel close to him. I have a share in his being. It follows that if I were to start bestowing good upon everyone, I come into contact with, I would soon feel that they are all my relatives, all my loved ones. I now have a share in them all. My being has extended into all of them. Those are beautiful words, and they just really affected me. I was reading them at the time that I was co-heading a department with someone with whom I was heavily competing for the title of managing director. Let's call her Joan. We not only were rivals, but I didn't like her, and I believe she didn't like me. Our rivalry was so raw that one day she was going on vacation, and I wrote her an email asking if she wanted me to cover for her with one of her clients. She told me no, and said, in the email, why would she want to do that? It wasn't in her career interest. That shows you how out in the open our rivalry was. Every day I rooted for her failure and rejoiced at her errors. Even though we both put up a good front for others, we didn't much like seeing, let alone working with each other. And it made it worse was that my office was right next to her, so even going to work was not pleasant. I had been doing Mussar for a few years at that point, but had not really thought much about using it at work. However, I decided I love this teaching so much, maybe I could bring it into work, because this was the deepest and most troubled place my soul was. I was thinking about this all the time, and maybe I could take Rabbi Dessler's teaching and put it into practice. So I resolved to take upon myself the practice of giving to Joan. In my case, what I could give her was my best advice as to how to advance her career, so I did. I took every opportunity to tell her how I thought she should craft her arguments, how she should deal with issues. I even edited her presentations, even though she didn't ask me, and I would give them to her as suggestions. I suggested how she could advance her stature by meeting with key people in the firm, and I generally try to act as her advisor and as her mentor. I also listened to what other people were saying about her, and of course, since everyone assumed I was her enemy, I had a lot of information about her failures, and I defended her to them and gave her intelligence about what they were saying about her. She was incredibly skeptical, as you might imagine at first. I think she assumed I was trying to sabotage her, and she didn't take my advice in the beginning. Nonetheless, I was consistent, and I journaled about it every day, and I just kept on doing it over and over and over again, giving as much as I could to her. And after consistently practicing giving to Joan for, I'm going to say 3 months, I did it. The walls began to melt, and exactly the process described by Rabbi Dessler came to pass. I actually grew fond of her, and she did for me, and it was no longer painful to pass by her office. And I still remember when I got a sneak preview from the firm management that Joan was going to be named the managing director. I came into her room the day before the announcements were made, and she looked up, and I just gave her a nod of my head like this. She came over and gave me a hug. And we remained friends and colleagues until the day she retired. I give that as probably the most useful example, the most important example for me of how just literally taking the work seriously and the Mussar work seriously into the workplace can really be transformative. The next topic I want to discuss is how the teachings of Mussar can help you to cope with the major stresses and disappointments at work. As a compliance officer at Goldman Sachs, I was in charge of policing behavior for the sales and trading businesses prior to and during the financial crisis. As one of the major banks in the world and involved in subprime mortgages, Goldman was one of the contributors to that crisis, which has caused so much pain to so many people. Needless to say, the crisis and my relationship to it triggered a great many of my middot. It was a very difficult time for me. Let me give you 3 specific things that sort of worked their way into my practice. To many Americans, Goldman became a symbol for greed in the financial industry. You may remember that we were called the vampire squid by a reporter for Rolling Stone. Working at Goldman switched almost overnight from being a symbol of pride to being a badge of shame. I've been proud to work at Goldman Sachs for over a decade, and now I try to avoid answering the question, where do you work, when I was meeting people at parties. But that wasn't my only problem. Our stock price dropped by 75%, from $200 a share to $50 a share. And there was a real possibility that my life savings, which was mostly in Goldman stock, would be wiped out. And there was a real possibility that I'd be out of work if Goldman went under. and looking for a job in my mid-50s. And then there were the press and the politicians. I couldn't avoid seeing us criticized in the press, sometimes fairly, but often falsely and terribly unfairly. And politicians were using us to try to make their political points. I could feel anger as I heard falsehoods being told about us, and I knew these things were false because I had personal knowledge of what they were talking about. It happened in the rooms I was in. To imagine what I felt, imagine that you were being criticized for things you hadn't done to a national audience. I was furious with the press and those politicians. So here I was. I was upset, I was frightened, and I was angry. As Alan has said many times, you practice Mussar in the good times so you'll have it available to you when you need it. Now is my chance to see if he was right. I did a great deal of journaling during this period. I used affirmations. I redoubled my study of Mussar texts, Duties of the Heart, the Ramcha, others, and I continued to facilitate the Vada in my community. And I came to see that I'd been knocked off balance in three major ways. First, it became clear that I was feeling so upset because of excessive pride and desire for worldly honor. As I journaled and listened to my inner voices, I became aware that I was ashamed to say I work at Goldman Sachs. But why? I was the same person. I realized that I was the same person before the crisis as I was after the crisis. But I realized it was because I had been for many years judging myself as special, as better, because of my success at Goldman. Goldman was and still is a great company with an almost mythical reputation in business for nurturing and developing intelligent, driven, successful people. I realized I've been walking around with my chest out for years because of that. Maybe even feeling superior to others because of that. And it was only now that that crutch was pulled out from under me that I realized my sense of pride had been coming from that tainted source. It was derived from the esteem of the public, not from a holy source, my relationship with Hashem. During this time, one of the key texts for me was the Rambam's letter, Igaret HaRambam. Let me quote some of it. It is blunt and doesn't pull punches, and I read it almost every day during a large chunk of that period. Through humility, you will come to fear Hashem. It will cause you to always think about where you came from and where you are going, and that while alive, you're only like a maggot and a worm, and the same after death. It will also remind you before whom you will be judged, the King of Glory. When you think about all these things, you'll come to fear Hashem who created you, and you will protect yourself from sinning, and therefore be happy with whatever happens to you. And now, my son, understand and observe that whoever feels that he is greater than others is rebelling against the kingship of Hashem, because he is adorning himself with his, in capital letters, garments. As it is written, Hashem reigns, he wears clothes of pride. Why should one feel proud? Is it because of wealth? Hashem makes one rich or poor. Is it because of honor? It belongs to Hashem, as we read, wealth and honor come from you. So how could one adorn himself with Hashem's honor? And one who is proud of his wisdom surely knows that Hashem takes away the speech of assured men and reasoning from the sages. So we see that everyone is the same before Hashem. Since with his anger, he lowers the proud, and when he wishes, he raises the low. So lower yourself, and Hashem will lift you up. So the way out of this sense of excessive pride for me was to recognize that fact and to focus on the relationship I had with Hashem. Everything comes from God. For my sense of honor, I realized I needed to look, I call it vertically rather than horizontally. I needed to care only about how I was doing in God's eyes, how I was becoming a purer soul. I was also worried, as I said earlier, about the existential risk the firm was undergoing. My spiritual curriculum was clear. I was scared. Was the firm going to collapse? Would I lose my wealth? Would I be out of a job? There was no mystery about what was out of balance here. The issue was how to bring it back into balance. I had lost my sense of trust. Tefillah was very important. Every time I said the Shema, the Shemona Esrei, I was using building the trust muscle. And my principal Mussar tools here were text study and affirmation. I looked to the gate of trust and duties of the heart and the book of Job during this period. In particular, I found transformative power, and I have actually since then as well, in the lines of Job, where at the end of the book of Job, Hashem speaks to Job from the whirlwind, saying, quote, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Speak if you have understanding. Do you know who fixed its dimensions or who measured it with a line? Unto what were its bases sunk? Who set its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the divine beings shouted for joy?" In other words, has said to me, who are you to think that you have any large role in the way the world's going to function? For some reason, those lines always rattle me and remind me that I don't understand a lot, and that the only sensible, intelligent stance is trust. That work on trust was also immensely useful to me. So with working on my humility and trust, I was really struggling with it, but getting into a pretty good place. I was definitely more centered. But I noticed I was still angry. I'd look at the TV and I'd be angry about the crisis. I would feel my anger particularly rising when I started to talk to people about what was going on. In particular, I focused my ire on Senator Levin, who was the principal accuser of Goldman Sachs in Congress. He was regularly on television telling the world that my firm was the one to blame for the world's troubles. And as I said to you before, I knew that of my own direct knowledge that much of what he was saying was just not true. I was talking to a rabbi friend one day, Rabbi Jonathan Slater, about this. He made a suggestion. He invited me to think about whether I could find a place to be compassionate towards Senator Levin, my accuser. That hit me really, it was like a lightning bolt. It was like all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, that's the media I need to work on. Compassion. And so I did. I started to journal about my feelings about the senator and take on the practice. And this is the fun part of publicly defending him when people at the firm would make comments about him. I told myself, I'm really serious about my soul work. This is exactly what I need to work on. Don't bask in my anger. Start to feel compassion to Senator Levin, and I did. I realized I started by focusing on the fact that he's just another soul, and I try to judge him with favor. I saw, he's just like me, trying to respond to the financial crisis the best way he could, trying to, in his own way, to lift the burdens of the people around him, lift the burden of his fellows, and respond to the pain he saw around him. If he was not 100% right about everything, it was likely because he didn't know the full facts. Not that he was trying to hurt me. And even if he wasn't scrupulous about getting all the facts, his heart was in the right place because he was trying to help the weak and the poor. That really helped me a great deal in recentering myself. So I was able to make progress on that, of course. That the step from judging him favorably to actually feeling compassion to him was much more difficult. I journaled about that, and there were moments when I felt I could feel compassion for him, and moments when I could. I'm far from, I'm definitely a work in progress. So I told you those stories. This is the second basic area I wanted to go over with you, because those sorts of experiences of feeling, needing to feel compassion to people at work, needing to feeling worried, and needing to feel a greater sense of trust because of the uncertainty of all of Parnassa, all of the world of the work world. And feeling humble or proud, having the middot triggered by whether you're doing well or not, are essentially the same kinds of troubles that I think most people have in the work world, or at least they're very common to many people. And I've found, and I think you could find as well, that work Mussar can be very helpful in that regard. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and then people can feel free to ask whatever questions they'd like, is what I'm calling using Mussar to make you more successful at work. One of the great things about Mussar is that it is based on tremendous insight into our nature as human beings, and I would also add our nature as divine souls, as Neshamot, I guess. As such, the lessons of Mussar are immensely practical and can actually help you succeed in the workplace. Here are a few examples. The more comfortable you are with seder, with order, the more productive you'll be. When I'm particularly unproductive, I schedule a few weeks, 2 weeks of work on my middot of seder. The more generous you are with others, the more well-liked you'll be. And if you focus that generosity on your boss, that's a tip that I like to give people. If you believe that your goal is to make your boss successful, give as much as you can to your boss, the more likely you are to be promoted. The more you take your proper space, neither too much nor too little, the more focused you'll be on at meetings, and the more successful you'll be. And as I told you earlier, the more you're thinking about the impression you're making at a meeting, because your middot pride is triggered, you want to be the one who everyone's looking at and saying good things about, inevitably the less successful you'll be. A few years ago, I realized that my Mussar training was actually helping me become more successful at Goldman, and I turned those lessons into a leadership training, which I regularly do at Goldman for people in my division. Let me share it with you. I call it the 10 guiding principles of a great leader. I won't go through it in the full detail, but I'll give you the outline. But it could just as fairly be called not the 10 guiding principles of a great leader, but it could be called for you, how working on your middot can make you a leader in business. The way I begin my talk is by saying that you can lead from any seat in an organization. Leadership is about influencing, and anyone can be influential. No formal position or title is required. Then I remind people that leaders don't lead inanimate things. They lead people. They may lead an organization, but an organization is just the people who comprise it. And then finally, I invite people to think about what kind of person they personally like to follow. I remind them that despite what we often see in the media, if they consult their own feelings, they will see they don't themselves like working for arrogant, selfish people, no matter how bright, dynamic, or tough. That's in the movies. What they all want to do is to follow someone who's a good person, or as we might say, someone who exhibits purity of soul, a good neshama. That's the essence of leadership. I then describe what I call the 10 principles of leadership, which are simply 10 Mussar traits that, held properly in balance, can make you a leader. Of course, I don't use the word Mussar when I go over this, but they all understand it, and I've only gotten positive feedback on this from the several hundred people I've done it with. First, what is the kind of person that you want to be led by? Somebody who's compassionate. If you care about people, they will want to work with you. I remind everyone about the fact that if their boss appears to care about them, they will want to help their boss. If your boss does not want to help you, if it is exhibiting no compassion to you, you're not going to go the extra mile for them. Second, generosity. I've spoken a little bit about it with you today or tonight. Generosity. By that I mean you try to make everyone around you better. I tell people over and over again, a leader is somebody who brings out the best in other people. It's not someone who does the most themselves. It's the one who knows how to allow other people to grow and make other people successful. Then everyone on the team does well, not just you. So it makes you a great leader, and people want to work with you. Truth is the third middot I discuss. People do not trust those who don't speak the truth. Again, what happens on television is just not the way it is. The great leaders are people whose word is their bond. Because when you're in business or when you're in any kind of significant enterprise in any organization, people have to rely on each other. And if you can't rely on the word of somebody, you're not going to be comfortable following them. Very simple, but it's just the middot of compassion, generosity, and truth. Fourth, responsibility. A leader is somebody who takes responsibility, takes blame for what goes wrong, and gives credit to others for what goes right. And I always tell people that that's true, because if something went wrong, there's always something as a leader that you could have done to prevented the problem from occurring. There's always an extra step you could have gone to, an extra explanation you could have given somebody, some extra awareness you could have had if somebody was struggling. And if you didn't see it, you're right to take blame for yourself. And then, of course, giving credit to others for what goes right, is something. It's just a gratitude practice. So that's my responsibility point, taking blame for what goes wrong and having gratitude for what others do for you. Fifth, equanimity. If you're calm, even in a crisis, your team will trust and follow you. It's really astounding, but I get probably more comments about the fact that nothing phases me at work than I do about anything else that I do at work. People do not want to follow somebody who is nervous when something bad is going on. They want to follow somebody who puts it in perspective. And of course, the work we do on equanimity is very helpful in that. Sixth, humility. The way I describe it to people is just remember, whatever we're doing, it's not about you. It's about the task. You need to, as I use Alan's phrase, you need to occupy your rightful place, not too much, not too little, make room for others. A leader is not somebody who dominates the room. A leader is somebody who dominates the room only when he needs to dominate the room or she needs to dominate the room. It's not about you at all. It's about the task. Seventh, having resolve. People like associating with people who get things done, who are finishers. And so having the ability to see something through from beginning to end. One of the classic Mussar middot, resolve, is something that's extremely important for a leader. Again, the movies you see where somebody just waves their hand, tells people to do things, and then goes to play tennis, that's just not the way real leaders are. And you wouldn't want to follow someone like that. Eighth, order. Say there. People always like clarity, simplicity, precision. They like clear instructions, clear deadlines. They like people who are going to say who are going to do what they say they're going to do. Simple stuff, but clarity of instruction is very, very important. Ninth, awareness. This is essentially, the first of the core of Mussar. I don't consider it. You may view it as a middot, you may not view it as a middot, but it's the underpinning of all middot. You must be aware with eyes and mind open so you can clearly see what each person or moment uniquely requires. A leader is somebody who doesn't just push through and get stuff done and turn everybody else into, and do the same thing at every moment, regardless of who the person is who's in front of them and what's going on in their lives. You have to see who's listening, who's not listening, who seems to be carrying something in from outside of work that's creating a problem, who's particularly sad that day, upset, energized, whatever. You've got to see what reaction you're having, people are having to what you're doing or saying, which is, by the way, one of the difficulties of this kind of setup, because I can't see your faces and I can't see how you're reacting to what I'm saying. But awareness is so important in leadership. And lastly, I call it Lashon Hara, but it's careful speech. Don't gossip. Every word out of your mouth has immense implications. The higher you are, the more important your words. I remember talking to our now CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, when he first became CEO. I've known him for 15 years or so. I've known him for 22 years since I've been there. And when he became CEO, I was talking to him. I said, what's the biggest surprise being the CEO of Goldman Sachs? He said that people care about what I say in a way that they never have before. A single word out of my mouth can create immense changes. People talk about it. And so I think that, that's exactly what it is for every leader. If you gossip about people, people won't trust you. They'll think it will reflect badly on you. If you're not careful with what you say generally, people will not want to follow you. So there it is, Mussar as leadership training. I'm just over them again. Compassion, generosity, truth, responsibility, equanimity, humility, resolve, order, awareness, and lashon hara, or careful speech. Of course, I don't tell people when I do this to journal, chant, or read the Ramchal. I mean, it's not a Jewish organization, but it has people from all over the world and all sorts of faith and non-faith traditions. But each in his own tradition can find the paths which they can use to improve their middot, whether it's journaling, meditation, reading texts, or something else. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say to you all. I want to close by reminding you all that we live only one life, but it is one unified life, and all of its parts need to be integrated. Many of us spend more of our waking hours working than we do at any other activity, and it's a real pity that we often feel so alienated there, or feel that we cannot be our true selves at work. I have found that Mussar can help bring that integration of your life into one whole life. That is the same you in the morning when you wake up, through your work life, through when you go to sleep. I hope I've given you some ideas how Mussar can help you bring more of your true self, your soul, with you to work, and how you can integrate a Mussar practice into your working life by using it as a gem for the improvement of your soul and soul of others. Okay, that was my talk. Does anyone have any questions for me on the chat or otherwise?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
This is Roger Bernstein. It was really a very wonderful presentation. My question, you sort of alluded to it. Do you ever explain to people with whom you're interacting what the basis is of your training, why you're doing this, how you've come about this?
Very, very rarely. If I'm dealing with somebody who is Jewish, I know to be Jewish, I may mention it. There's a fellow here, I'm in London now, and there's a gentleman I work with who's a very religious Anglican, and I talk to him about it. But as a general proposition, actually, you can get, at least in my company, one can get into trouble if you're in a leadership position, as I am, in putting your religion out there, because people may feel that they're pressured in some way to follow suit. So we're asked basically to be as neutral as we can on these things.
Thank you.
In fact, I'll tell you, there was a poor woman who was in my office who was not Jewish, and she was very upset about something that's going on. And I found there was this wonderful book of Hasidic stories that I thought would really appeal to her. I gave it to her. I gave her one, and she thanked me very much. And she, a year later, cited that as sort of quasi-religious discrimination because she wasn't Jewish, and I had somehow given her that book. People can misread things in the workplace. Anyone else want to either talk or send me a chat? I have plenty of time. No? Is anyone typing something they'd like to talk about?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Drew. Have you ever find yourself in a place where a decision by the firm was really up against some of the middot that you have talked about, or others that maybe you didn't speak about? And if you found yourself in that place, what did you do about it?
Well, I've been pretty lucky because my job is essentially, since I run compliance for us outside the United States, they look to me as the sort of the ethical guru. So if I have a problem, I can usually get it satisfied pretty quickly. I'll tell you the kinds of things that come up from time to time. I'll give you a classic one, which I had a real problem with. Payday lending. There are plenty of people who go to payday lenders. They give them their paycheck, and they get charged an exorbitant interest rate. And I put my foot down on some of these interest rates that I think were just crazy, and we just weren't going to fund people. But what's interesting is that the whole business I don't like. And if you get into some interesting conversations, because I don't like the whole business, but then as people explain to me, there's no other lender for these people. And at what point do I feel if we don't lend to these payday lenders, give them money, then the retail clients who they deal with may have no other source. Then what do you do? My response to that typically is not on my watch. We're not going to do it on my watch. They'll find some other way. I'm not sure whether that's the right answer or not, but that typically is what happens. It's actually somewhat complicated because there are a whole bunch of constituents. I actually teach a class on I organize a class on reputational risk, and I realize that we have sort of obligations to our fellows at the firm. We have obligations to the markets as a whole to make sure the markets are fair. We have obligations to our clients, and then we have obligations to the society writ large. And often they're in conflict. My client wants to do something. It's the right thing for that client, but it may have an implication. I'll tell you when we turned down a couple of years ago. It was like a decade ago. I mean, this is an easy one, but I'll tell you anyway. We were going to buy nuclear plants for the express purpose of the tax credits that would eventually we could get from shutting them down and disposing of the nuclear fuel. Now, it was all a federal program, but I would say we're buying these plants in order so that a year from now we can throw out of work 10,000 people. That's just not I don't care if it's committed by the federal regulations. So I'm pretty lucky in that regard. I haven't had those kinds of challenges at Goldman. Usually the kinds of things that you see us having problems are something we didn't realize, something I didn't realize, something that seemed to happen away from me. But once I raise it, it's not really a problem.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, I have a question here. What if the problem in the workplace is systemic and not an issue focused on an individual or an interpersonal relationship? Which I think is similar to what Irv, you were asking. Look, this is the most difficult issue, and it's hard because there are multiple constituents, and it's something that I struggle, and certainly from the financial process I struggled with. But let me answer it in two different ways. One is I just went over obligations to my fellows, the markets, clients, and the wider society. And I forgot one other group, which is our shareholders. Our shareholders, to some extent, it's not my company. It's not the CEO's company. It's the shareholders' company. And the shareholders have certain points of view, and those certain points of view are not necessarily points of view with which I agree. And I won't necessarily. I have to, on balance, think if I'm comfortable with the way our shareholders approach things, because there are going to be things that our shareholders are going to want to do that if I was my own private company, wouldn't do. That's number one. The other answer I give, and this is really more about the crisis that I referred to, and I think that your question may be talking about, the systemic issue, the subprime mortgage crisis. If I had realized that one of the problems that we have is we don't see the implications of what we're doing. And I can assure you that nobody I knew at Goldman, and I knew a lot of people who were involved in subprime mortgages, thought this through to the end, through the implications of what was going on. And you have to understand, the Fed didn't understand it either. Most of Congress didn't understand it. We had created a system in which there was what was called a moral hazard, in which we could buy things which were not very well constructed, which had a lot of bad loans in them, and sell them to somebody else without taking much responsibility for them. That we knew, but we didn't realize that it was going to encourage bad behavior on the part of the loan originators. It's just the way it works. And in retrospect, I can't believe I missed it, but I can assure you that I missed it, and so did most of the people I know. I hope that's a partial answer. This is one of my favorite topics to discuss, so if you want to discuss it some more, I'm happy to do that. Question. If you stay in any workplace long enough, you'll learn enough about coworkers and bosses to see their good sides and bad. Seeing that bad side can lead to a loss of professional respect. And that is not helpful when it's your boss. Is there a Mussar tool to counteract that? See, to me, I see a lot of that. By bad, I guess you mean that they're not as good as in their ideal world, they could be. I try to focus on, judging people with favor, which means that you try to see the good side. But I think it's also important to understand that the things that they don't do well are probably affecting them, as they are probably feeling that they don't do it well. My experience has been that people, when I think someone's not performing well, oftentimes they know it. They may know it. They may not admit it, or they may admit it, but at some level they know that they're not doing well. And sometimes having the discussion with them about what the issues are, excuse me, can be a liberating thing for them. I guess the only other thing I would say, because I don't have a better answer for your question about there being a Mussar tool, is that the focus on pride and humility and on sort of taking the capital letter I out of it has been very important. I found that when I was having a difficult time dealing with people, whether it's my boss or otherwise, it was often because I was worried what they were going to say or think about me. If I just focused on the job, it was usually better. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Jeff, but at least that was a shot. Anyone else have, we have another 5 minutes or so if anyone has anything else or wants to follow up on any of those questions. One of the things that I think is important to realize is that, if your boss is a bad boss and you have given your boss feedback, well, first of all, can you give your boss feedback? If you can, that's wonderful. If he or she can act on it, that's even better. If your boss either will not take feedback and is making your work life uninteresting, I think that the key Mussar concept is you may have to get out of that work environment and trust that things will work out fine. I mean, a lot of people are stuck in a bad place in a job with a bad boss or where their skill is not a good match for their job because they're afraid that they'll never get another job when they get out. I don't mean you to be reckless in regards to that, but often it's the fear that's keeping them back. And you can get more centered if you spend time focusing on trust that things are going to work out and things may become clearer for you. I think I have time for one more if anybody has anything else. Here we go. What actions would you have potentially taken that would have been guided by Mussar practice if you would actually anticipate the harmful results of the practice? Well, here's what would have happened. Because since then, I have been on my guard, looking for all sorts of other things. For example, you guys may or may not be aware, but the student loan situation is pretty horrible in this country. There's $1 trillion of student loan debt, which is not going to get repaid. And I got really nervous about 3 years ago when I saw that coming, and I started to ask questions. Thankfully, for Goldman, we're not really involved, but the federal government, because the federal government basically is the one who's making all the loans rather than private parties. But you should talk to your congressman about that. But the point is, that gave me an opportunity to think of that through. And here's what I found. Raising the issue, I have to be really, really clear to trust. To trust that if I do the right thing, if I say the right thing, I'm not going to get fired. Raising issues like that, even for somebody at my level, can bump up against some people with some other vested interests. And so using the Mussar techniques of trust, Mussar techniques that allow me to sort of recenter myself and not worry about being fired or being criticized are super important if you anticipate harmful results from something. I guess also awareness is really key too, because well, actually two parts. Awareness, in order for me to be successful in any appeal I might have about a potential problem, and there are plenty of problems in the financial services sector, and I think about them all the time now. I have to figure out how to approach people. I have to figure out, how they think and what kind of arguments I could make to appeal to them. And that is a really sensitive issue, and my being generally aware of being able to read people and see them has been very helpful. Is very helpful for that. So I would say awareness. And the third thing that happens in these contexts that I think is important, that's useful, is equanimity. Your arguments are more convincing if you seem calm, if you seem comfortable with yourself. People make decisions in large part emotionally based. And being able to present yourself as calm, comfortable, and confident with your views is very important. And so, equanimity is another trait that I would cultivate to sort of do that. Okay. Unless there's something else quickly, I'm going to sign off. Goodbye to you all. I enjoyed it very much.
Great job.
Other questions? Feel free to call me or email me.
Great job, Robert. Great job, Robert. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.